And I'm the marketing manager at Next Dimension. And we're talking today a lot about digital leadership and an organization's readiness to get on the train for digital transformation and understanding where they sit in their appetite for change and their ability to make the changes that they want to change to move forward as an organization. I know that we spent some time together trying to put some questions together. If we were able to talk to an expert in digital transformation, what questions would we ask? And lo and behold, we have gotten ourselves in contact with Kevin Yarnell from Cisco. And Kevin, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit and let us know who it is we're about to hear from as I ask you these 12 tough questions.
Hopefully they're not too tough. I'm Kevin Yarnell. I look after our hospitality, travel, tourism, sports, and entertainment group here at Cisco on the digital transformation side. So I get the opportunity to work with clients all over the Americas, talking through what is their digital strategy and putting that in place and starting from beginning of we have no idea where we're going all the way through to some of our clients that have put a strategy in place and how do they implement it. And they're looking at us to help with some of the technology aspects of the digital transformation. So I get the pleasure of doing that. I have all the fun clients, but I also represent an organization that looks after both healthcare, retail, manufacturing, financial services, and all of that fun. We have 5 different categories that we fit into. So I can speak on that behalf as well.
And it's really going to be interesting as these questions come out if we can find some similarities, even though the industries seem so far apart and so different, if their challenges kind of remain the same.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, and I do think that there are going to be some carryover from industry to industry because as we're seeing, especially now, and the pandemic is a perfect example of that, where a traditional healthcare client is now having to partner with a retail client to do vaccine distribution or things like that. Hotels are now starting to open up their conference space to allow for super vaccine events where they can get 3 and 4 thousand people in at a time. Well, we would have never thought about that a year ago or 18 months ago. It would have just been business as usual. Well, now some of the industries are now starting to blend over, and we're starting to look at how does that transformation happen, right? How do I have to adopt my business to understand that times are changing, and I now need to look at new ways of getting in front of my client, of getting in front of my customer. So I do think that that's where digital transformation will come into play, and I do think that some of the industries, some of the use cases that we talk about will kind of go from one industry to the next.
And there's so much out there already as far as content about digital transformation and how to apply it to your business. But let's kind of start at the top. Really, what does digital transformation mean to you, Kevin?
That's a great question. And thinking through that, I think I can go with the traditional answer of, taking what is a manual process and automating it and start looking at ways that we can use technology to help with some of that process. And or I can give you a use case that speaks to me as a business traveler. And that use case is something as very simple as going to check in and you've had a very long day of travel and delays and all that fun stuff. And you go to check into your hotel and maybe you've been there before, maybe you haven't, but you go through and they give you this little plastic key and they say, okay, Mr. Yarnell, you're ready to go. Go up to floor number 12. And I lug my luggage all the way through and I go through the elevator and I try and stay safe. And I go all the way up there and I walk through the long drawn out, because inevitably your room's at the very end of the hallway, right? And I take this piece of plastic and I go to plug it in and it doesn't work. And now I'm very frustrated. And again, that's a very manual process, right? I take this manual key, have to insert it in a manual lock, and in theory, the lock should open. What happens if it doesn't? Then I have to take it all the way back down and go all the way back through that same process. And I have to wait in line. And I talk to the person and I say, hey, my key doesn't work. And they manually reprogram my key.
My anxiety is building as you're saying that because I can recall so many times of this
Absolutely. And you're
happening.
frustrated and you just want to get some rest and you have a big
Yes.
presentation the next day or whatever. Or flip side is you're there on a leisure travel and you're lugging your 2 kids and you're going through and they just want to go to the pool and they're fired up and they're excited and it just doesn't work, right?
Hmm.
Or we could talk about digital transformation, which means I could use my mobile key on this fun little device and I could walk up not have to deal with anybody, get off my plane, go in to check in, go straight to my room because they already sent me my room number. I go up and, oh, it doesn't work. You're right. But I get on a quick little chat bot with a contact center agent who looks at it and goes, oh, I see there's an error, my fault. Let me reprogram it for you. If you wouldn't mind, just hit the refresh button. Refresh, click. Now I'm ready to go. Door opens, I'm inside, all's happy, everybody's good, right? I took what was a traditional manual process, transformed it to a digital process, made it now, instead of my anxiety levels, instead of my frustration levels with your property up here, now I'm back down to here. I'm good. Problem solved. Boom. As travelers, we all know problems are going to occur. It's not about the problem, it's about how did you deal with it and
Mhm.
how quickly did it get resolved for me. And that's exactly where I go to things like travel scores and TripAdvisor and other things. And I talk about positivity. I talk about, here's
Sure.
my problem, but you fixed it. That's now
Mhm.
you now turned what could have been a very negative situation to a very positive situation. Boom, done through the use of technology. It was very easy to do. That's a true digital transformation. That's taking a manual process, utilizing technology to make the end result a positive experience instead of a negative experience. That's what it means to me. That's Kevin's life in a nutshell. Of that's what digital transformation means to me, is taking something very, very manual, turning it
Yeah.
into a positive experience through the use of technology.
And it's so great that you applied something so almost practical as far as your explanation for digital transformation and what it means to you. What you just described sounds really exciting to anybody who's hoping to travel again one day. Um,
We
but
will.
if
We
you
will.
think back, right? But if we think through that process and to going from manual to the euphoria of the hotel key that you describe, it's starting to think about the business processes and the types of mindset changes, process changes. It sounds rather complex. It sounds like a big undertaking. How can companies look at making something like that as simple as possible, that kind of a transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really starts with understanding what organizations or what silos within your organization can we start to break down, and then we take it into very small chunks, or we take it into, you know, doable, measurable tasks
Hmm.
instead of the overall big business value, and start looking at it from end to end. That can be daunting, right? I used a very simple task, but there can be incredibly daunting tasks involved in each of those. Well, how do you take it and break it into small little groups? And is your organization ready for those small little groups and to take on those small tasks first, right? First of all, in that environment, we had to look at what is the manual process and identify it and who owns it. And then we have to look at, okay, if we were to make a change, how would that impact their business on a day-to-day basis? We start looking through some of those. And that's where, looking at an organization like Next Dimension to help you document what are those processes, and looking at it from a perspective of how can we help automate just a small piece first, and then what's next, and then what's after next. And we start looking through that process of, hey, what all would that entail? And we start taking it into small, doable little tasks instead of the big, daunting, you know, end-to-end program. Yes, we'll get there, absolutely. And having that vision of where we want to go is important, but we also have to look at what are the doable tasks and who do we need to get involved to make that happen. And then the most important piece is documenting that, right? Documenting that individual task and understanding what are the success criteria of that documented task.
For sure. And really, when you talk about things like breaking it down to bite-sized pieces and then the next, and then the next piece after that, in all your experience with all these different organizations that you've worked with across industries, where do you think most businesses are right now? At like what stage of their digital transformation journey are most companies sitting in right now?
I think it depends on who you talk to. I think if you talk to the leaders of those companies, they have a vision of where they want to go. And
Hmm.
most of them are in the stage of planning and preparing and understanding. I mean, this pandemic has really forced folks to look at their business differently. And I think most organizations are now looking at where do we want to go, but they don't necessarily have a plan of how to get there. And that's why I say, depends on who you talk to. The leadership in most organizations say, we want to get to here, the folks who are responsible for the day-to-day operation or actually implementing those tasks,
Hmm.
they need to figure out a plan of what does that impact look like to myself and my business, and let's
Hmm.
all be on the same page, and let's get the buy-in from each of those groups to say, yeah, I'm willing to sacrifice, or yeah, I'm willing to take on that additional task with the understanding that the outcome is going to save me a significant amount of time, right? When we start talking about different tasks, like in a manufacturing customer, looking at the fact, looking at a consumer packaged good program, and one of the ones that we worked with recently is an alcohol production. And what they did is they looked at, hey, their bar business, if bars are shut down, well, we can't produce our product in keg form anymore. We've got to look at it from a consumer packaged goods perspective. So they had to change their lines, and they had to look at it from a perspective of, oh, by the way, if we want to stay relevant, we have to change what we were selling in, keg form at the bar into bottle form. Well, what does that mean? And what does that increase and how does that look? And then what digitally can we look at from a production standpoint? And how do we automate that process? And what does that look like? And who all has to be involved in that? And oh, by the way, we can't forget this keg format, because when things do open back up, we're going to have to start that line as well again. But we
Hmm.
have to put this in place. And even some of them, I mean, they went from their local community, instead of selling alcohol in their bottle forms, they were selling bottled water, or they were preparing bottled water and giving it out, right? So they had to look at their business process and how did that change, right?
Hmm.
So I do think taking a look at your business, and very long answer to a very simple question, which is, right, where are they in this process? I think a lot of our organizations are looking at their business right now and trying to figure out where do they want to be short term and long term. And I think, we have to get the buy-in from each of the individual departments to get us to that direction that we're trying to go.
It's like you can read my questions ahead of time because you're leading right into my next one. I will step back though and say, as an interesting local caveat here is we do have a number of alcohol companies and producers here locally, and they actually switched to hand sanitizer.
I've heard
And
that.
that's what they were producing. And it was very interesting. They would offer that for free to go and pick up and whatnot at the start of the pandemic. So you're absolutely right. And it's happening at large scale and at small scale, for enterprise, mom and pop, and across the board. And
But,
the
but you stop and think
speed,
about that.
yep,
You stop and think about that. They would have never even considered producing hand sanitizer
no,
2 years ago, but there
no,
was a business need, and they looked at it as what's good for the community,
yep,
and we have to get that out there. And then what portions of their organization, what would that do to impact their portions of the organization, right? The
right?
per the person who is traditionally responsible for the recipe of whatever alcohol product they were selling
Mm-hmm,
is not an expert in making hand sanitizer, but all of
mm-hmm,
a sudden they had to learn, right? And they had to figure out, what does it look like? We all have to do that, right? We have to do that across every industry. We have to look at, what does our business look like? A retailer is now looking at it from a perspective of, hey, we used to go to market this way. Well,
mm-hmm,
now we have to change our methodology and go a different way. Well, what does that look like? And who all, we talked about buy-in, who all within the organization has to buy in to
yeah.
that, to start small. And then how do they how do they accomplish it? And that's again where your organization can take a look at their business process and help them through that transition piece.
Yeah. And a big piece that you're talking about with buy-in and another phrasing, but it's essentially the same. I'd like to hear your thoughts on tying them together, is it's very well documented that you need a culture shift for a successful digital transformation. It can't just be from the top. It has to be driven an entire mindset shift across the organization. So if you can maybe talk to me a little bit about a culture shift versus a buy-in or connecting them, it'd be really great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we one client that we work with is a very large gym company, right? Physical fitness gym
Yeah.
company, and one of the things that they were working on was that exact culture shift, right? How do they change from going from in-person class and workout and training sessions and selling memberships to, hey, we can't have people in our gyms anymore
Hmm.
because of the lockdowns. How do we shift that paradigm to doing what we do on a digital platform and
Hmm.
doing, you know, online workout sessions and building that structure, and how do we look at that? And it was a very much a business culture shift, right? I mean, they're used to having classroom sessions of 30, 40 people where they're building the curriculum for that to individual use cases where somebody might log in and still want that same interaction. How do they go about that transition? And it was a culture shift very much around taking a look at where's our business going, taking a look at how do we stay relevant, and taking a look at from a trainer perspective who's used to training a class of 30 people to creating that same content, but it's delivered in a different format. And how
Hmm.
do they adjust, and looking at, again, it goes back to doing it in small bite-sized pieces, doing it in how do we take step number one? How do we look at where we're going and take step number one and accomplish that? And who all do I need to get involved from there? And then step number two, step number three, and again, documentation, documentation, documentation. We've got to figure out, I have a saying that I love: documentation beats conversation, right?
Oh. Hmm.
And that statement simply is all about, how do I document this? How do we take
Yeah.
it and create a process around what is next, and then what comes after next?
And if you're talking about a mindset shift like that, what are some of the helpful tips and reminders for keeping the right type of mindset during that transformation to not fall back into old habits?
Great point. And I think that being able to, it goes back to the buy-in, and being able to, instead of having a mandate or a corporate, policy, we're going to do this. It's all around, hey, if we did this, how would that impact your piece of the business? Right? And having that open dialogue and having that understanding from a leadership perspective, department heads collectively going that direction and being able to tell that story to their employees or their team members, and being able to say, hey, this is the direction we're thinking about going. How would that impact you? What does that mean? And collecting that data and really listening and being able to hear what our employees are saying. Ultimately, yes, there has to be business drivers and we have to move, but we also want to collect that buy-in. We also want to get them to understand, right? I look at the casino environment, and their world has completely changed. And what
Mhm.
happened from a dealer who was dealing blackjack to now all of a sudden they have to wear face coverings and work in plexiglass and only so many people. Well, they had to buy into that, and they had to understand that if we wanted to be open, these are the rules we have to play by. Are we willing to play by those rules? And most of them said yes, and they understand the rules have changed, and they understand that their job is going to be the front line of enforcement. So they had to understand that and buy into it. The other option was they're not open, they're shut down, and they're out of work. They
Yeah.
would they would prefer to play by these certain rules and be open and still be able to do these types of things. So, that's just one very simple hospitality centric environment, right? We look at the airline industry, and the airline industry has looked at it and went, a lot of them have decided that they're only going to be at 2/3 capacity and leave the middle seats open, right?
Mhm.
That's just something that they had to understand and abide by. So as we continue to open up, we're looking at different ways to keep everybody safe and go through that process as well. So
And if we were to take a look back, kind of back out a bit to and have an organizational view, what do you think some of the biggest roadblocks mid-size private companies are facing when they're trying to push through this digital transformation journey?
I think the biggest one that we see often is the perception of not having budget, perception of, we can't do that. Who's going to pay for it? We can't
Mm-hmm.
go through that change because we've always done it this way. And being able to change that mindset and being able to talk to the overall ROI versus just the one project caveat, right? I don't have budget to do that, so I'm not even going to entertain that. We look at things like, you know, collecting employee data, or looking at something as simple as social distancing. Well, one of the requirements of that would be potentially a Wi-Fi network and doing a Wi-Fi refresh. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have budget to do a complete rip and replace Wi-Fi budget or Wi-Fi refresh. You're right. But if we look at it from a very small what do we have to do first piece?
Mm-hmm.
Well, ideally at the end of the day, we would get to the return on investment that would pay for that wireless refresh. And again, it's all about going through those small little steps. So one of the roadblocks we see right now is the perception of, or first is the perception of, we don't have budget for that. We can't do that. We don't have budget for it. But we're not asking for $1 bazillion to get started. What we're talking about is just have the conversation. What would step one look like? And then step two and step three. And as we get to the end of the road, we can build out a true value statement that says, we can't afford not to do this. Right. And again, I go back to the alcohol production scenario where they had to completely revisit their lines. Well, they might not have had budget to retool a complete line, but at the end of the day, they had to do that. And when we
Mhm.
built that entire process out to keep them in business, they had to retool their lines. That was a cost up front, but
Yeah.
that specifically around the automation and the IoT piece, we looked at where else could they use that 3 to 5 years from now? And
Hmm.
what else, what other production efficiencies could we look at? And how do we make them more efficient? Right. So just that I would say is let's have the conversation. Let's continue to talk about and utilizing your organization and looking at, Next Dimension, how do we prepare that value statement that goes all the way through so that at the end of the day, the return on investment is significantly higher than the initial upfront cost.
And I'm so glad we're recording this because you gave us some great tips on the first steps would be to be overcoming some of the various roadblocks that we may be facing for our organizations. So thank you for those notes.
My pleasure.
Now, what about the companies that were, the early adopters, those who pre-pandemic were all about this digital transformation? They were all gung-ho about let's do this, let's transform our business. But then, of course, they've switched gears to just hanging on over like the last 10, 12 months. Um, how would they know if their strategy is still relevant? What do we say to those people who worked so hard to build a strategy and maybe where they were close to pulling the trigger, and then of course they had to literally switch gears without, without any option?
Yeah, they're trying to keep the lights on, right? Which
Yeah.
is a real struggle.
Hmm.
I would say keep the vision. I would say let's continue to look at, but let's look at it from what are our immediate needs, right? It might be we were trying to change our entire business. Now I need to look at things like return to work and how do I make sure that my employees have the hybrid environment that they need to continue doing the job that we're looking at, right? So we take the same excitement, the same motivation, the same enthusiasm that we had before, and we just redirect it to an immediate need or an immediate problem, right? So how do we take a look at where we were going and are changing our entire business to how do I change my business now that's going to give me the biggest return on investment, right? The same strategy you had in place and the same enthusiasm is not unwarranted. It just needs to be
Hmm.
redirected, right? And so we take a look at what is our immediate need today. How do we take that same philosophy of return on investment and put it towards something that is an immediate need today? It could
Hmm.
be return to work. It could be, and I don't necessarily agree with the return to work because I do think our employees have been working this entire time. So maybe we change it to return to office. Maybe
Yeah.
we change it to something like that. We change it
Hmm.
to, we pivot to giving our staff the tools that they need to be productive, to be the most productive, right? It might
Hmm.
be a hybrid work scenario. It might be, hey, instead of me working a 9 to 5 job, it might be I now need to work 2 hours here, take a break, 2 hours later, but I might be working later. And we just need to be adaptive and comfortable with that, that new shift in what does the work day look like. And that's just
Hmm.
one small example, right? There's also examples in manufacturing and in healthcare where in healthcare I know they're going through a completely different scenario where they're experiencing clinician burnout and
Hmm.
folks are working so much that they need to give them
Yeah.
breaks and they need to figure out what are some of the other ways that we can be productive and still give folks the tools that they needed to be productive, right? I mean, if we're looking at some scenarios where instead of seeing everybody face to face, is there an environment where we can do telehealth? And do we need to transition into that mindset instead of, yeah, we have to see our patients face to face or
Hmm.
in person, right? That's just one of the pivot tools that have come out to where we had to look at, yeah, we absolutely understand that we need to see our patients in a different format. And
Hmm.
that was our key 2 years ago or a year ago. Now it's well, do we accelerate telehealth? And do we invest in that technology first? So
Mhm.
I think there are those pivot points that we can focus on.
So for all of our early adopters and enthusiasts out there, dust off your digital strategy that you had all done up, buttoned up in 2018, 2019, and just kind of take a new look at the same document and see how it can still be applicable. And don't be afraid to push forward because we're going to have to. Like you said, we're not returning to work. We've been doing it the whole time in some
Yeah,
capacity.
and I think the people that were enthusiastic, the folks on your team that were the business drivers of that
Hmm.
digital transformation will still be your business drivers. They
Hmm.
will still help promote and look at a new philosophy just in a different lens, right?
Hmm.
And so we need to, as leaders, we need to tap those same folks and continue to utilize their enthusiasm and their willingness to support and their willingness to drive change within their teams. We need to
Hmm.
tap them again and continue that strategy.
Hmm. Okay, so we've talked about don't be afraid to look at your transformation. We've talked about don't be afraid to dust off your transformation. We've talked about taking a look at the world around you. We've talked about what are some of those roadblocks and how to overcome them. And we've mentioned budget and the culture change and all these things. Now, if we have a company that's agreed and saying, yes, we know we need to do this, and yes, the value is there, and yes, we need it for our business, but now we see that there's some options. What is some of the best ways to budget and finance this type of transformation? Do you look at a capital expense with on-prem technologies? Do you look at operating expenses with so many things as a service? Is it a hybrid? How do you decide which is right for you as an organization?
I think it is going to come down to the organization, and I think discussing those options with folks that have been through it and can provide you different scenarios. I don't know that there's a one size fits all for everybody. I do think, as we continue to push things to an OpEx model or a SaaS model, I do think there's value in that. I also think there's value in a hybrid model, and depending on what the organization is willing to adopt and what the organization is willing to consume now. But I do
Mhm.
think creating a roadmap and putting a framework in place of how do we get to where we want to go, I think is valuable and incredibly valuable to push that. I do think there is absolutely cost savings in moving to a SaaS model if it makes sense for your business. But I do think we have to look at that and have an understanding of what do we do today, putting in a what do we do to get started phase, what do we do next, as we talked about, and then what's after next, and where do we want to go long term. And I think looking at those financial models across and getting creative, right? I mean, I think at Cisco, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is creative financing and looking at a way to help our customers adopt the technology in a way that is consumable for them, right? Our traditional go to market might not be the best way to go for everybody. Looking at
Mhm.
creative ways, working with an organization like Next Dimension and finding how do we creatively put a strategy in place that's going to get us to achieve our business outcomes, and looking at it from a business outcome.
Mhm.
Again, going back to how do we create the ROI, that's going
Mhm.
to be the piece that is absolutely necessary. And I know your organization does some fun, creative ways of looking at helping our customers get to where they want to go
Mhm.
with reducing the struggle of budget or the struggle of financing now.
Yeah.
Let's look at some creative ways to get us to where we want to go, and we can partner with you and help you on that long-term strategy. But the other key there is also putting a framework and putting a piece in place that says, here's what we need to do today, here's where we want to go, and here's what's after next. And I think the sooner we can do that and the sooner we can get that documented, the
Yeah.
sooner we can all be in play to say, let's put a strategy in place of how do we finance that,
Document, document, document. And he said, and he said it
right?
again.
Documentation beats conversation. I love it.
There it is. Now let me ask you for companies that are all set and ready to go, they are ready to pull the trigger and they are ready to go from strategy development to actual execution. We are ready to transform. We're making our first few steps. What are some of the signs that us as a company may need to go back and iterate and adjust? If I'm the business going through the transformation and I start to make the changes, what are some of those telltale signs that maybe we need to go back and take a second look? Maybe this may not be the best first step forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we talk a lot about the term fail fast, right? Let's
Hmm.
figure out what is our success criteria? How are we going to measure success? We, our clients know their business way better than Cisco does, or we simply have the ability to help with a strategy in play, but we have to figure out what are their success criteria and how do we identify those quickly? And are we hitting those metrics? If we are, great, let's accelerate those. Let's move fast. If we're
Hmm.
not, let's fail fast. And let's look at what caused it and how do we adjust? And how do we figure out where that is? Is it, people, process, or technology that is causing that failure? If that is the case, how do we adjust one of those three things? And let's look at that, right? And let's continue down that path. But I do think fail fast, accelerate quickly, move if you're ready to go and you have the team and the buy-in, and what are we waiting on, right? Let's get rolling on this
Hmm.
today, and let's get going, because you're going to see the results that much faster.
Of course. Now, if I'm going through this transformation and I'm ready to roll, which departments do you, in your experience, have been able to transition the smoothest? Are there some departments that kind of have done a better job than others, or is it some personnel types, or is it some industry types? Where do you see some of the smoothest? And then, of course, the next question is going to be, what have been some of the clunkiest? Can you give me any insight on those?
Yeah, and without calling people out directly, right? I mean, I think
Oh, I
organizations that
didn't call them out, calling them clunky.
without, I think organizations that have a digital strategy officer or somebody that is responsible for the success,
Hmm.
obviously that means they're full in, they're ready to go. I do think in looking at certain things, I do think that there are traditional organizations that are stuck in their ways, or they've done it this way forever. And I think that we just need to identify that. Some organizations, I don't think it would be fair for me to say, oh, IT is traditionally the slowest adopter, because I do think there are some organizations we've seen where IT is pushing the forefront and they're
Hmm.
going this direction, right? Same
Hmm.
with marketing or same with operations. I do think the key to all of this and the key to success is to have open dialogue and involve the department heads of each of those departments. The last thing anybody wants is, hey, by the way, we're going this direction. We bought this technology and it's yours to support it, and dump it in somebody's lap. Nobody
Hmm.
likes that feeling.
Hmm.
Getting involved in the buying process, getting involved in the evolution process up front. Again, we talked about it before, getting that buy-in is going to promote your success and is going to allow you the ability to get to where you want to go that much faster, because
Hmm.
then they can understand how it's going to impact their department up front. So I think that's going to be mission critical. I think the folks that are traditionally, to your point, are the clunkiest, are the ones that aren't involved in the upfront process and are told on the back end, this is where we're going and you're going to buy in. You're going to get on board or you're going to get out. I think that never works. I do think
Hmm.
having those upfront conversations, explaining the return on investment and getting their buy-in as to how it's going to impact them is
Hmm.
absolutely mission critical upfront.
Now, what about companies that are those few, those proud, those groups that have made it all the way through their transformation and they're shifting now to digital optimization? So they've gone through the transformation. Now they're seeing, is there any ways to further fine tune this bad boy? And how can we continue to optimize? What should their shifted priorities be?
Yeah, so I think those are the fun ones. And when they get to that point and they're all excited, then we look at how do we rinse and repeat, right? How do we
Mhm.
take what they've done and celebrate their success? And how do we rinse and repeat their success in other departments? The second piece to that is, how do we take what they've done and look at it as a new revenue stream, right?
Mhm.
How do I take it and say, oh, okay, as an organization, I can now take what we've accomplished and sell that piece or that technology stack or that methodology, that new process, and
Mhm.
look at, how do I sell that to my industry? How do I sell that to others? Right?
Mhm.
And we look at taking that piece. That's the fun. That's when it gets really, really fun. That's when it gets really, really, exciting, because then we can take it and say, A, we're celebrating your success. B, we're look at us, look at what we've accomplished, and we think we have something here that other people within our industry or other people within our community can now look at and can replicate that.
So
Would be,
much easier to buy into a proven methodology, isn't it?
right? Absolutely. Something that already works, when we have the win, is gonna sell that much easier, and it's gonna help eliminate some of the speed bumps or cautionary tales along the road. We've already been through it.
Exactly.
We've already gone through it. So yeah,
Exactly. So I can't believe our time is flying so fast, but I do have one last question for you, and that
sure.
is, how can you tell, how do you actually measure if your digital transformation was successful? What are some of the key performance indicators, aside from the fact that the last project is ticked off the list, it's done? I mean, what are some of those KPIs that we can really see that we've done something here?
Yeah, I like to look at it a couple of different ways. One,
Okay.
obviously sales results or any of the financial results, that's an easy target to hit, right? If we
Yeah.
put those out there, do we hit our target? The
Hmm.
second one is employee satisfaction and employee involvement. And looking at it and say, how excited are people to tell the story? How excited are people to tell what they've been through, right? If they're willing and positive and they're willing to say, absolutely, we started here with plastic room keys. We've now gotten to the digital key and the ability for our guests to have that satisfaction number, and that satisfaction scores are skyrocketing. How willing are they to share that journey with their peers or with other folks, especially new hires, right? If we're expanding our team and we're looking at that, how willing are they to say, yes, we went through this, but here's why, and here was the great results of the end? And are they willing to positively tell that story, right? As we continue to go through, and I talked a lot about buy-in. Buy-in is a
Yeah.
continuous organic process. It's not a one and
Yeah.
done. It's a
Hmm.
continuous organic process to say, are you willing to go through it again? And if they are, or what other suggestions do you have? This works so well. What other
Yeah.
suggestions do you have? Where can we go next? Right. And I always talk about a framework and what do we have to do today? What do we do tomorrow? And then what do we do next? Well, that starts over because once you get to that third piece, it starts over. And then we continue to look at what's next. And that's when organizations are evolving and continuing to grow. That's when organizations are getting bigger and thinking differently and changing. Where are we going as not only as an organization, but as an industry? And that's when it becomes really fun. And that's when this digital transformation is replicable and repeatable to, hey, you did this. And that's when you create a brand around
Yeah.
digital transformation, right?
Well, it's a good thing I asked an expert because I would have never have guessed employee satisfaction to be number two. I was waiting for price per part. I'm waiting for productivity. I'm waiting for something in graphs and charts. That no, but you've explained it very well and why it's so important. And once you've articulated it, how could it be anything else?
But if we can't get our employees to buy in, the rest of that is secondary in the sense that I always look at it from a guest satisfaction perspective, being in the hospitality industry. If
Hmm.
if I can't get my employees or my staff members or my team members to buy in,
Hmm.
well, I don't care what room rate we're charging. I don't care what free breakfast we're giving away. It's
Hmm.
it's a commodity at that point. If my experience checking into the hotel isn't getting a bright smile from my employee, then why am I there? Right? It's
Hmm.
all around experience. And I think that translates to every single industry, whether it be healthcare or retail or manufacturing. If the employees aren't buying into what we're doing, why are we doing it?
Hmm.
So
Kevin, this is great. Thank you so much for giving us the time today and for answering all of our questions. So well thought out, and it gave us a lot to think about as well. It only maybe speared some more questions, so it wouldn't surprise me if you and I maybe met up again and had another conversation around some of these follow-up questions that I'm sure will be coming our way.
my pleasure, and bring it on. I mean, I love having these types of dialogue and continuing to have this conversation. So like I said before, it's an organic conversation. So let's continue to have it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day, and again, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.